The moment my husband's associate clinked her champagne glass and announced she was carrying his child, I did not drop my fork. I did not cry. I did not make a single sound that would give either of them the satisfaction of watching me come undone. I simply set my wine glass down, pressed my napkin to the corners of my mouth, and thought, 31 years. That is how long I have been building Hargrove Associates into one of Boston's most respected family law firms. And that is precisely how long my husband has been trying to make everyone forget I built it at all. Before we go any further, tell us where you're listening from tonight. And if this story speaks to something you know in your bones, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have something I think will matter to you. Now, back to what happened. The evening was supposed to celebrate the firm's 35th anniversary. My husband had insisted on hosting it at the Langham, Boston's most elegant hotel, with its marble columns and chandeliers that cast everyone in the most flattering light. He said it was a gift to the staff. What I know now is that it was theater. He needed an audience for what came next. I had spent 40 years in family law. I had sat across from hundreds of women who told me they never saw it coming. I used to believe them, sitting at that long table draped in white linen, watching my husband lean toward the young woman 3 seats to his left. I finally understood what they meant. You see it. You have always seen it. You simply cannot make yourself accept what your eyes are telling you. Her name was Vanessa. She had joined the firm 18 months earlier, fresh from a clerkship with a federal judge, with sharp instincts and a smile she deployed like a tool. My husband had hired her personally, over my objection that we were already carrying more associates than our caseload justified. He told me I was being territorial. I told myself he was right. When she stood, the table fell quiet with that particular hush that precedes something irreversible. I hope you'll all forgive me for making this a bit more personal than our usual toasts, she said, her voice smooth and practiced. Richard and I have some news we've been holding close. We're expecting a baby in the spring. The room processed it in stages. First the confusion, then the understanding, then the silence that lands like a stone. Every face at that table turned to me. Every single one. I had cross-examined federal witnesses with less pressure bearing down on me. I folded my hands in my lap, felt the cool weight of my grandmother's ring against my palm, and smiled. How wonderful, I said. Congratulations to you both. My husband looked at me the way people look at a structure they expected to collapse and cannot understand why it's still standing. Vanessa's composure flickered. She had prepared for tears, perhaps for a scene. What she was not prepared for was my calm, and that told me everything I needed to know about how well she understood the situation she had walked herself into. We finished the dinner. I spoke to every table. I thanked the catering staff. I told our longest-tenured paralegal that her salmon was wonderful, and then I rode home alone in a car I called myself, because my husband had offered to drive me and I had told him, without raising my voice, that I thought that was unnecessary. In our house on Marlborough Street, I poured 3 fingers of bourbon I never touched, sat at my desk, and opened the partnership agreement I had drafted in 1994. I knew what was in it. I had written most of it, but I needed to read it again, because the next morning everything I did would need to be precise. The firm had 6 equity partners. I was one of them. My husband was the managing partner, a title we had agreed he would hold for 5-year rotating terms. His current term ended in 4 months. The partnership agreement required a majority vote to remove a managing partner before term, but it also contained a conduct clause I had insisted upon after watching a colleague's firm implode. Any partner found to have created a hostile work environment, misused firm resources, or engaged in an undisclosed relationship with a supervised employee could be removed by a simple majority, 4 of 6 votes. I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted completely. My oldest friend in this profession, a woman who had retired 2 years earlier from the partnership, still sat on our advisory board. She had been practicing family law since before most of our associates were born. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I wondered, she said. I noticed it at the summer retreat. I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain. And you know what I always say about certainty. I did know. She had told me for 30 years. Never act on what you suspect. Act only on what you can prove. I need to know what you've seen, I said. And I need to know who else might know. Come for breakfast, she told me. 8 o'clock. I'll make the good coffee. I did not sleep. I spent the hours before dawn going through billing records I had access to as equity partner, pulling every matter Vanessa had billed since joining the firm. What I found was not unusual at first glance. She was productive, her hours were consistent, her client work was strong. But when I mapped her schedule against the firm's credit card statements, a pattern emerged that no accidental overlap could explain. Hotel charges for what the expense reports called client strategy sessions, car service to locations with no corresponding client meetings, and most revealing, a furnished apartment in the South End, listed under Hargrove Associates LLC as a recruitment and housing resource for incoming associates. An apartment that, according to the building's management, had housed exactly one person for the past 14 months. By 6 in the morning, I had photographed every page I needed. By 7, I was in the shower. By 7:45, I was on my friend's doorstep. She poured coffee and listened without interrupting while I laid out everything. When I finished, she closed her hands around her mug and looked at me the way she had looked at me the day I passed the bar, like she was calculating what I was capable of. The apartment alone is enough for the conduct clause, she said. If firm funds were used to house a partner's romantic companion, that's a direct breach of fiduciary duty. Has he used client trust accounts? Not that I can see, but the expense misrepresentations are clear. Who else on the partnership do you trust? I thought carefully. Of the other 4 equity partners, 2 I trusted without reservation. 1 I was uncertain about. 1 was my husband's law school roommate and had been his defender in every dispute the firm had ever navigated. I need 4 votes, I said. I have 2 certain. I need to earn the others. My friend nodded slowly. Then you have work to do. And Eleanor. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. Before you do any of it, you need to speak with Vanessa directly. I had not expected that. Why? Because whatever else she is an employee of a firm you are about to take control of. And because a woman in her position, carrying a child alone, being used as a pawn in a man's midlife catastrophe, may have information you don't, and may want to give it to you. I sat with that for a long moment. You always were the smarter one, I said finally. She smiled. I was just the one willing to sit still long enough to think. I spent the next 2 days doing what my husband least expected, nothing visible. I went to the office. I took my meetings. I chatted with associates about their caseloads. I told our office manager the anniversary gala had been lovely and that she had done a beautiful job with the flowers. My husband circled me with the nervous energy of a man waiting for an explosion that keeps not coming. I could see him recalibrating, trying to read me, trying to decide whether my silence meant I had accepted the situation or was preparing something he couldn't yet see. He tried twice to have the conversation. The first time I told him I had a client call. The second time I told him I was not ready, and that when I was ready he would know. That second answer frightened him more than any argument could have. He knew me well enough to understand that my readiness would not look like his. On the 3rd day, I sent Vanessa a message through the firm's internal system, asking if she had time for coffee that afternoon. Not in my office, I specified. The coffee shop on Newbury Street, where the firm's junior associates liked to work on Saturday mornings, neutral territory, with enough ambient noise that no one would overhear us. She arrived before me. I had expected her to look defiant. Instead, she looked like someone who had not slept well in weeks, her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of a person who has been maintaining a performance past the point of sustainability. I sat down. I ordered tea. I looked at her for a moment without speaking. I assume you're here to tell me I'm finished at the firm, she said, finally. I'm here because I was told I should be, I replied. And because whoever told me that has never given me bad advice. She studied me. What do you want from me? The truth, I said. Not about the relationship. I already understand what happened there. I mean about the firm. About what you've seen. Something shifted in her face. The defensive posture she had walked in with softened slightly, and what came through was something more complicated. He told me he was going to leave you, she said. I know. That's what they all say. I believed him for longer than I should have. When did you stop? She set her coffee cup down. When he asked me to sign a backdated consulting agreement. He said it was to formalize my work on a specific case, that it was standard practice. I almost signed it. Then I looked up the client it referenced and realized the case had been closed for 8 months before I joined the firm. I kept my expression even. He wanted documentation that predated your relationship. I think so. I didn't sign it. I told him I wasn't comfortable, and he dropped it. But the way he dropped it, he wasn't angry. He was recalculating. She paused. I started paying closer attention after that. And what did you find? She reached into her bag and placed a folded envelope on the table between us. I'm not proud of all of this. I made choices I can't undo. But I'm going to be raising this child by myself, and I need to know that I'm not going to be made the explanation for things I didn't do. Inside the envelope were printed screenshots, emails between my husband and the firm's bookkeeper, whom he had brought on personally 3 years ago, instructions to categorize the South End apartment under operational expenses with rotating descriptions, client hospitality, associate recruitment, conference overflow, a total of over $60,000 in the past 14 months. There was something else, a memo my husband had drafted, but it appeared, never sent, outlining a proposal to bring in an outside investor group to buy out 2 of the equity partners, the 2 whose votes I had counted as certain. The memo framed it as a strategic growth initiative. What it actually was, I recognized immediately, was an attempt to restructure the partnership in a way that would reduce my stake from equity partner to salaried counsel. It was dated 6 weeks ago. I refolded the papers. I placed them back in the envelope. I breathed through the particular steadiness that 30 years of courtroom practice gives you when something hits you harder than you expected. He was planning to reduce my position, I said. I think so. I don't know if he ever intended to go through with it, but he was modeling it. I looked at her. Why are you giving me this? She met my eyes directly. Because I spent 18 months believing that being valuable to him meant something. Because I watched him take credit in client meetings for strategies I developed, and smile at me afterward like I should be grateful he let me be in the room. Because I am 4 months pregnant, and he told me last week that he thinks we should discuss all options, and I know what that means. She stopped. And because what he did to you, erasing you from your own firm's story, presenting himself as the founder, when everyone in Boston knows you built this practice, I watched him do that, and I told myself it wasn't my business. I was wrong. We sat for a moment in the noise of the coffee shop. The apartment? I said. Were you aware the firm was paying for it? I knew the firm had arranged it. I assumed it was standard for incoming associates. I found out the truth about 3 months in. She paused. I should have left then. I didn't. You're telling me now. She nodded. Will that matter? It might, I said. I won't make you any promises I can't keep, but I will tell you this. Whatever happens with the partnership, I have no interest in pursuing action against you for conduct that was enabled and encouraged by someone in a direct supervisory position. That's not how I practice. She exhaled slowly. It was the first unguarded thing I had seen her do since we sat down. I called my friend from the parking garage and told her what Vanessa had shared. She listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then said, Call Thomas tonight. You need someone outside the firm who can move quickly. Thomas had been my mentee 20 years ago, now one of Boston's sharper employment and partnership dispute attorneys. When I reached him that evening, he answered on the second ring, heard me out, and said, How fast do you need to move? Faster than my husband is expecting, I told him. I'll clear my morning, he said. Over the following week, I worked the way I had worked in the years before my husband had taken credit for our work so thoroughly that even I had half forgotten the original division of labor. I met with Thomas daily. I reached out quietly to the 2 partners I trusted, over lunch, over phone calls, in conversations that never used the word vote, but that laid the evidence in front of them with the precision of a case file. What they saw was unambiguous. Firm funds, misused. A supervisory relationship concealed from the partnership. A memo that revealed my husband had been planning to restructure the equity stakes without partner consultation. The partner I had been uncertain about called me on a Thursday evening, unprompted. I've heard some things, he said carefully. I want to hear your version, I told him. All of it. I did not editorialize. I presented the documents the way I would present them to a judge who had not yet decided whether to like me. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He told me last year that you were planning to scale back your role, he said, that you were thinking about semi-retirement and had asked him to manage the transition. He said you'd agreed he should start building the infrastructure for that. I let that settle. That is not true, I said. I have never discussed semi-retirement with him. I have never asked him to plan anything on my behalf without my knowledge. Another silence. I see, he said finally. I'll be at the meeting. The fifth partner, my husband's law school roommate, I did not approach. I knew where he would stand, and I needed him to remain there. If he suspected what was coming, he might warn my husband, so I left him alone and counted to 4 without him. We called the emergency partnership meeting on a Monday. My husband did not know it was coming until Sunday evening, when the formal notice arrived per the partnership agreement terms. He called me immediately. What is this about? His voice had the controlled quality of someone working very hard to sound calm. Partnership business, I said. I'll see you tomorrow, Eleanor. A pause. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to consider what it means for the firm. We're in the middle of 3 major matters. A disruption right now. A disruption, I repeated. Is that what you're calling it? He did not answer. I'll see you tomorrow, I said again, and ended the call. The conference room held all 6 equity partners plus Thomas, whom I had invited as outside counsel, a right I was entitled to under the partnership agreement. My husband arrived with his roommate beside him like a second, both of them carrying the energy of men who had a strategy they believed in. That energy lasted about 6 minutes. I presented the case the way I would present any case, methodically, without theatrics, following the evidence wherever it led, the expense records, the apartment, the concealed relationship with a directly supervised associate, the backdated consulting agreement he had attempted to have Vanessa sign, and finally, the memo outlining his plan to restructure the equity stakes and reduce my position, dated 6 weeks ago, drafted without any partnership knowledge or authorization. My husband's roommate interrupted twice. The second time, one of my trusted partners looked at him and said, When I finished, my husband leaned forward. His approach was the one I had watched him use in negotiations for 3 decades. Project confidence, dismiss the premise, redirect to consequences. This is about our personal situation, he said, looking around the table rather than at me. Eleanor has every right to be angry, but using partnership mechanisms to settle a marital dispute is not appropriate, and all of you know that. The personal situation, said my friend, who I had asked to attend in her advisory board capacity, is relevant only because it created the supervisory conflict. What we're here to address is the misuse of firm funds and the undisclosed restructuring memo. Those exist regardless of anyone's marital status. The memo was preliminary thinking, he said. I never circulated it. You drafted it, Thomas said pleasantly. On a firm server, during firm hours. It exists. His roommate tried. He argued process, argued timing, argued that this was being rushed. The uncertain partner, the one who had called me Thursday, looked at the memo printout in front of him and said nothing, but his expression said enough. The vote was 4-2. My husband and his roommate on one side, the rest of us on the other. He stood when the count was recorded. He looked at me then, for the first time since the meeting began, and I looked back at him without flinching. 31 years, he said. You're throwing away 31 years. I'm not throwing away anything, I replied. I'm protecting what I built. He left. His roommate followed, with one backward look that contained more exhaustion than anger. The door closed behind them. My friend, seated at the far end of the table, looked at me with an expression I had seen on her face perhaps 3 times in 40 years. Quiet satisfaction, the kind that does not need to announce itself. The room took a breath. The vote to appoint me as managing partner was 5-0. His roommate, to his credit, did not vote against. He abstained, which was the most decent thing he could have offered. The first week was the hardest. Not because the work was unfamiliar, but because I had spent so many years performing the modesty that the environment required of women who wanted to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who had never had to wonder whether they belonged. Stepping fully into the role, without apology, without softening it to make others comfortable, required a conscious daily decision. I began with the staff. An all-hands meeting, the full firm, partners through receptionists, in which I told the truth in the plainest terms I could manage. There had been a leadership failure. There had been a breach of the firm's ethical standards. That chapter was closed, and we were not going to pretend otherwise, but we were also not going to let it define what came next. I watched faces in that room process what I was saying, and I saw, among the junior associates especially, a relief so visible, it was almost painful. Several of them had known. Several of them had been made to look away. My husband's roommate requested a meeting with me at the end of the first week. He sat across from my desk with the careful formality of someone who is not certain of his reception and is trying not to show it. "I want to be clear," he said. "I didn't know about the apartment or the memo." "I believe you," I said, "because I did. Richard told me you'd agreed to step back, that you'd talked about it. He told a version of things that served him," I said. "That's not new information to either of us." He was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," I told him. "I need partners who are here for the firm. If that's you, I want you here. If your loyalty is to Richard personally, in a way that can't coexist with your duty to the partnership, then we should talk about a graceful exit. I'm not interested in a partnership that's waiting to fracture." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I should have paid closer attention to what he was doing." "Yes," I said, "but so should I. And I'm the one who built the firm with him, so I might be the only one entitled to say that." He stayed. He worked, and the work was good. The Bar Association inquiry was manageable because we had moved before it became necessary for someone else to force us to. The Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers opened a review of my husband's conduct, which we cooperated with fully, producing every document they requested without being asked twice. The resolution took 8 months and resulted in a formal censure. His license was not suspended, which was the outcome I had quietly hoped for, not out of generosity but because a disbarment would have generated coverage that would have attached to the firm's name in ways that would outlast both of us. I spoke with Vanessa formally once more, in the presence of Thomas, to take her statement for the bar inquiry. She was clear and precise and did not embellish. She had made choices she regretted, and she said so without performing contrition. When it was done, she stood to go, and at the door, she turned back. "I've been doing some research," she said. "There's a Northeastern legal clinic that handles family law matters for low-income clients. They're looking for a senior attorney to supervise their associates 2 days a week." She paused. "I thought of you when I saw it." I raised an eyebrow. "You thought I'd be looking for additional work? I thought you might want to do something with all of this that wasn't just about the firm." She looked at me evenly. "You've been a family law attorney for 40 years. You know what it costs people to navigate the system without proper representation." I thought about that for a longer moment than I expected to. "Send me the information," I said. She nodded once and left. The divorce was not contentious. My husband had retained counsel who was skilled at signaling the depth of the hole their client was in. We reached a settlement within 3 months. The Marlborough Street house remained mine, as did my equity stake, which had in any case always been documented clearly in my name. He kept the Back Bay condo we had purchased 6 years earlier, which I had always found cold. He kept the investment accounts we had opened together. I kept the one I had seeded before our marriage with the salary from my first years of practice. I was 63 years old and managing partner of the firm I had spent my career building. On the day the settlement was finalized, I drove back to the office, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and stood for a moment in the doorway of my office, which had always been mine and which I had never had any reason to doubt, except that in the years of my husband's managing partnership I had somehow drifted from it, let more of my time get absorbed into committee work and firm administration, while the visible leadership work, the speeches, the client relationships, the published profiles, accumulated on his side of the ledger. My friend came by that evening with a bottle of wine from the same Burgundy region we had visited together in 2001, which she had been saving for what she called an appropriate occasion. "Is this the appropriate occasion?" I asked. "It's been appropriate for about a decade," she said. "I was simply waiting for you to be ready to celebrate it." We sat in my office and she told me things she had kept quiet over the years, small moments she had witnessed where my husband had quietly repositioned my work as collaborative rather than singular, where he had described the firm's origin as something that had grown organically rather than something I had seeded and tended for years before he was even a partner. It was not dramatic material. It never is. The erasure of a woman's professional contributions rarely happens in a single act. It happens in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small adjustments to the narrative until the original becomes unrecognizable. "You should have told me," I said. "You wouldn't have believed me," she replied. "Not then. And even if you had, what would you have done with it? You needed to see it for yourself." She was right. She was almost always right, which is why I had spent 40 years trying to return her calls before she finished leaving the voicemail. 18 months after the partnership meeting, Hargrove Associates won the Massachusetts Bar Association's Pro Bono Firm of the Year award. We had restructured our associate development program to include mandatory clinic rotations. We had brought in 3 new equity partners, 2 of them women, one of them a first-generation law school graduate who had clerked for a judge I had mentored years earlier. We were smaller in terms of headcount than we had been 18 months ago, but every metric that reflected the quality and sustainability of the work had improved. At the award ceremony, I stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom that could not have looked more different from the Langham on the night of the anniversary gala, though the geometry was roughly the same. Long tables, white linen, chandeliers turning everyone's face gold. I thought, for just a moment, about Vanessa, standing up with her champagne glass. I thought about the silence that had followed. I thought about setting down my wine glass and folding my hands in my lap and deciding, in the span of about 4 seconds, that I was not going to give either of them what they were waiting for. What I had not known in those 4 seconds was that the composure was not just strategy. It was the distillation of everything I had learned in 4 decades of sitting with people on the worst days of their lives and helping them find the thread back to their own strength. I had given that capacity to hundreds of clients. I had simply never had occasion to use it on myself. I looked out at the room, at my friend in the second row with her careful, satisfied expression, at my partners and associates who had stayed and fought alongside me through an ugly year, at the junior attorneys from the clinic program, who had been given seats at the tables along the edges, and who looked very young, and very uncertain, and very hopeful, in the way that people look when they are at the beginning of something they cannot yet imagine the end of. 35 years ago, I said, I opened the doors of this firm with a second-hand desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a client roster that fit on an index card. The work was the same then as it is now, helping people navigate the hardest moments of their lives with as much dignity as the system will allow. I paused. There were years when I let other people tell the story of how this firm came to be. I am not interested in telling it that way anymore. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something true is being said. This award belongs to the attorneys and staff who stayed and rebuilt and refused to let one man's failures define what this firm is. It belongs to every client who trusted us with something irreplaceable. And it belongs to the firm's founding vision, which was always about what the law can do for people when it is practiced with integrity. I lifted the award slightly. We will keep doing that. We have no intention of stopping. When I walked off the stage, my friend was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She did not say anything. She put her hand briefly on my arm, the way she had once done on the day I argued my first case before the Supreme Judicial Court, decades ago, and then she stepped back and let me go greet the people who were waiting to shake my hand. I shook every hand in that room. I learned every name I did not already know. I stayed until the staff were clearing the glasses from the tables. Then I drove home to the house on Marlborough Street, where the only name on the deed had always been mine, let myself in through the front door, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the entry hall, listening to nothing except the particular quality of a house that belongs entirely to the person standing in it. I was 63 years old, and I had built something that outlasted the person who had tried to reduce me to a footnote in its story. The night Vanessa stood up with her champagne glass had felt, in the moment, like the worst thing that had ever happened to me in a room full of people. Sitting here now, I understood it differently. It was the night I finally stopped making room for someone else to stand where I should have been standing all along. The house was quiet, the night was clear, and I had exactly as much ahead of me as I chose to build.